Welcome, Dr. Cotter. And we're going to do questions and answers with Dr. Cotter. Rachel Anderson and Debbie Oberste and Marin Ailey are also here with us, and some of the questions they're going to help us out with. We had 112 questions. I managed to distill it down to about 46 questions. So if your specific question didn't get answered, we kind of tried to lump them together and do the best that we can. So without further ado, let's get started. If I can run my computer. Oh, here we go. So first question, how important is subitizing compared to just counting?
Well, first of all, young babies can subitize. That's a gift given at birth. In fact, we now know that 2-day-old babies can subitize. Counting, on the other hand, takes a lot of practice. Children are not usually good counters until they're 5 or 6 years old. Subitizing is a lifelong skill. So it's extremely important, and also it allows you to visualize. And visualizing is extremely important in almost every occupation you can think of: engineering, medicine,
sports, all sorts of things.
Yes.
So subitizing is very important. It is definitely something we want our children to do. Is it ever too late to gain a real understanding of number sense?
Absolutely not. Our brains are designed to keep learning until we're 102 years old, maybe even longer. And there are many parents and grandparents have said they have finally learned number sense from teaching the right start to their children. So no, it's never too late to understand.
For those of you that have been paying attention, I am Dr. Cotter's daughter. I am the oldest, and so I was kind of the guinea pig. So I was taught very traditionally, and then my sister and brother got more of Dr. Cotter's ideas because we saw what didn't work with me. I don't think I really understood number sense until I taught my children. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, I get this. Because I was taught the drill and kill method, and it was just symbols that you put together, made these other symbols, and this was the right word for it. It didn't make any sense to me. Now I get it. Now it makes sense.
Well, actually, it's not an all or none situation. I actually learned more about number sense when I was studying to be a Montessori teacher, even though I was already an engineer at that point.
So kind of, as you say, we can keep learning as we go.
Yes.
Here's another question. How do I get started? And Rachel, I think if you don't mind, I'd like to have you answer this one.
I'm working. There we go. All right. How do I get started? Is this referring to how do we get started in the curriculum, or how do we get
curriculum? Right. So I'm thinking placement tests. What do we need? How do we work through it? Give us a real quick run through.
Yeah, so the first, if you've never used Right Start Math and you have a child that's older than, say, kindergarten or preschool, you will want to go to our website and take our placement test to find out what level the child is in. You do not want to start necessarily because of a specific grade that your child is in, but basically what they understand. So that's really what that placement test is going to do, is determine what your child understands and where they need to be placed on based on that information. Now, if you have a kindergartner, we will just go ahead and start in level A. You'll have just all of the information they need from there. If you have a preschooler, contact us. We will guide you to that curriculum.
You will need book bundles. You'll need the math set. As far as getting started, basically you open it up, lesson 1, off you go. Some people like to read the intro pages ahead of time to kind of get a feel as to what's going on, but you don't need to. We also have overview videos that will help you teach. Now, the overview videos are not for the children to watch. Think of them kind of like a big sister that's coming in beside you and saying, okay, this is what's coming next, and this is how we're going to do this. And when it says, look for the appendix pages, they're over here. So we're going to go through and help you with the overview videos. I think that pretty much answers that one. Let's look at the next question. How much time should a new parent invest in learning the methods of this program to be successful at teaching your child the first level? basically open and go. There's nothing you need to know other than as long as you can read, you can do this.
And don't think you need to teach the way you were taught, because there are some very definite differences, which you already mentioned. One is subitizing.
And the other part of that too is research has given us new ways to learn, with new ways to teach, new ways to learn. So the way that I was taught is different from what my children, we know more from my children, and now my children's children, we know more. So the way you did things or the way that you were taught is not necessarily the best way anymore. I'm not saying it was wrong, but we know more. So kind of keep that in mind as you're going through it. Here's somebody that says, I have 4 children in Right Start Math. How do I juggle math for everyone and all the other topics I need to teach them? Debbie has had, I think you have what, 4 children, 5 children, Debbie? And I think she taught 3 of them or 3 or 4 of them all at the same time. So can you address this one, Debbie? Oops, we need your audio on.
I should know better than that.
Yeah.
Sorry. I actually have 6 children.
Oh, 6. Okay, I lost one. Sorry.
So when I found Right Start, I had 5. And so my first 3 started into it, and then my other 2 came into it. And so between all of them, there was up to 5 kids at a time. And some of them were at the same level for a while, and some of them came to different levels. My thing with a lot of children, because Right Start does require the teacher to teach, which is wonderful. And it does take a little bit of time. But with multiple children, what I do is I scale back on other subjects, especially when they're younger. I just focus on math. I focus on their reading. What is it? Arithmetic. I can't even think right. Writing, reading, and arithmetic. And that's kind of where my focus. And I threw in Bible because that was a big deal for us. Did I do math every single day with every single child? No, I kind of staggered them, and I might try to make game days on a day where it's a little overwhelming. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to get this done. We would do a game day. I learned about halfway through to start doing math year round. And a lot of that is because my children did better with constant math. When they stopped and had a big break, and then we had to do a lot of review, it just wasn't as good as if we just kept at it. So in the summertime, I might do 2 or 3 lessons. And then when I started doing that, I'm like, wow, why didn't I do this sooner? Because with all those children, it made life a lot less stressful. So those are just some options. I could say, time-wise, you might put a timer. I know that's not Dr. Cotter's favorite thing, because if you have a child who's very into it, don't let that timer ruin it. But at the same time, gauge your children. Are they paying attention? Are they really into it? Get the lesson done. If they're starting to wane, they're losing, stop. Put a little marker where you're at, just start up again the next day. Will it take a little bit longer? Yes, but everybody's a lot more happier.
And I'd like to piggyback on that real quick. When you've got a bunch of kids, it's great because when the little one needs to play a card game, there's 3 or 4 other ones who can play the card game with them. So the oldest one is really the only one, or the one that's in the highest level is really the only child you should be playing card games with. But even better yet, have your spouse do it. Or is grandma nearby? Or can the neighbor kid come over and play games with your kid? I mean, that mom will probably pay you to have their kid come over and play card games with your kid. But everyone from that second child down should be playing with another sibling, playing with an older sibling, which is giving the older ones a review and the younger ones are doing it. And it gives you a minute to go and teach the next child. Another question, if I'm teaching 2 grades from the same book, can I skip to the next level so not to keep the older student from getting too far behind? Quick answer on this, no skipping books. You can teach the older at a faster pace, which means, okay, I'm doing lesson 47 today and I'm doing it 2 weeks again, for the younger one. But by the time you hit that lesson the second time around, you already are very familiar with it because you just went through it with the first one. But no skipping books. Dr. Cotter, anything to add on that one?
Yes, even if you didn't finish the book by the end of the year, you still must finish the book, because because the next lesson, the next level will not include those lessons.
Yep.
So you do not skip lessons.
Okay. How do we keep motivating a child? How do we keep motivation when a child is struggling?
Well, a little bit of struggle is normal and natural. I mean, even just watch a baby learn to walk. It's very frustrating. I mean, they fall down, they get up and they fall down and they might even cry, but they're still motor to keep learning how to walk. Well, it should be the same thing with math. And also our attitude as the adult, if we kind of make the attitude that, here we have to teach math again, or if they see you doing math activities like taxes or bank statements, if you happen to do those, and they see you with a frown on your face, math isn't something that I really want to get involved in. And the games are designed to increase motivation. So if there's some other problem, look carefully. Why doesn't the child want math? Maybe you can ask them. Maybe they need glasses. Maybe they need more quiet. Maybe they need to move around. And I love what Rachel does. She involves putting physical activity in with it. So I hope those are some ideas that might help.
Another one we had talked about earlier is varying the teaching location. Nobody says that you have to do it at the desk or at the table. There's no reason why you can't do it, on the stairs. I actually have a cousin of mine that would teach her child, who's a very twitchy child, would actually lay with his feet up the stairs and then his head would be down. And on the landing is where she would teach it. So he spent a lot of his time trying not to slide into their homework, but he was getting his lesson done. So vary it, include the games. Watch when you're teaching it too, because maybe early morning is best for your family, or maybe when the baby is napping. And like Dr. Cotter said, watch your attitude. Are you like, oh, it's math time again? Or you're like, hey, it's math time. So watch your attitude. Rachel or Debbie, anything to add on this one?
I think for me, it's just, you kind of touched on it. Sorry, Debbie. I really just keep the activities going. Keep a guideline on the length of time your child is able to focus. I think one of the biggest probably struggles that parents have is, I've got to finish this lesson before I move on. And so they're teaching a kindergartner a lesson for an hour. Well, that's entirely too long for the attention span of the child. So they are like, oh, math, because they don't want to spend 60 minutes working on a math lesson. So keeping an eye on your child's attention. And when you start seeing that wane, just like Debbie mentioned, stop, put a sticky note where you stopped, and then come back to it next time. In the meantime, play a math card game, do something fun, make sure they're using the manipulatives. I think that's another thing, is like, oh, we're done with the manipulatives, you should be doing this on your own. So we're elevating their stress levels and not giving them the materials they need to find the answers that they do not know. So making sure you're keeping it going, and if you start to see them drift off or their attention stop the lesson, and then come back to it later on or come back to it the next day.
Incidentally, when I was teaching 24 children in my Montessori classroom, my math lessons were no longer than 5 minutes.
Well, mine are no longer than 5 minutes. But to say, I go along with what you guys are saying. The other thing I have found is my attitude, and I know this was mentioned, but my attitude really will reflect on my children's desire to do math or not to do math. And I've learned that. And so now with my grandchildren, I work really hard at, hey, it's okay. Let's break it down. We take it smaller, when they're struggling. I have struggling learners. Out of my 6 children, 3 are struggling learners, and all 3 of my grandchildren are struggling learners. So we struggle a lot. And I have found that if I don't feel like I have to rush through the lesson, like Rachel said, because I'm one of those, oh, we got to get it done, and then it builds stress, and your children feel that stress, and it just kind of cascades. So I have found that my attitude really helps a lot in motivating a child if they're struggling. And if I'm struggling, sometimes we'll just take the day off. I'll send them off to go play a game or something, and I just do what I need to do to kind of, all right, we're going to come back tomorrow nice and fresh.
And remember, it's not what topics you cover during the math class. It's what you uncover for them.
That's very good. Sharon, you had a question?
I just wanted to comment on that. Most of my clientele are kids that are math anxiety kids. And so I work really hard to separate stress from math, keep them away from each other. And so even if a kid comes to me and they're feeling stressful, I will, okay, we're going to play games today. You know, we're going to do something light. So that's one of the things that I love about this program is that it's very easy to shift and say, you know what, we're going to play games today. And we're still learning. We're just, so keep the fun in it. I think that's
Good.
just so important.
Yes, thank you.
All right, next question. What do you feel is the best way to memorize the basic facts? Joan?
Well, first of all, memorize basic facts. Let's cross that word memorize out. Let's say we want to learn the basic facts. And it turns out that the best way is not flashcards, not time tests. Many people have told me that's the source of their math anxiety. So let's cross that off to start with. But that's why we really work on visualizing and subitizing to give the child a mental picture of each fact. And then they can just bring up their mental abacus and give you the answer. Remember, a child knows the fact if they can give it to you in 2 to 3 seconds. And that's plenty of time to bring up that mental abacus and move the beads around if you need to. And that's the best way. And for practice, use the games. See, worksheets and time tests don't teach you. They just tell you what you don't know.
Debbie,
Can
you had
I-
something?
I would like to add, I could not memorize my math facts. I did enough to get by. I did the whole rote. It wasn't until like using Right Start with my children, I find repetition. And so I tell people it's like a recipe. When I go to make a recipe, you know, I have to read the directions and then I go to cook. The more I make this meal, the more I use the recipe, the less I have to look at my recipe to pretty soon, not only do I know it, I can tell others about it. I look at math facts the same way. It's for me and for a lot of children, it's the repetition. It's the constant use and repetition because it just now it comes a lot more naturally for me. But I will tell you, I am someone who does not memorize facts well at all. But I have found with playing the games and then using the tools as needed, you know, when I was working with my grandchildren and, you know, they struggled, I'm like, hey, let's look on the abacus, or hey, let's look on the short multiplication table or something, just because sometimes their mind goes blank. But it's not because they don't necessarily know it. It's just in that moment, we just have one of those days. But repetition is really a big thing for memorizing or getting to know your facts.
The repetition is the drill, and that comes from the card games.
I prefer
right.
the word practice to drill. One other
Right.
thing too.
Oh, let's go
A
back. Go ahead.
couple of years ago, I was giving blood and we were calculating how many pints or something in a gallon. And a woman wanted to know what 8 times 8 was. She simply could not remember and she had no way of figuring it out. So if she had the abacus in her mind, she could have figured it out, but she couldn't. She just got
Or
so
had some
obsessed with that.
strategy and
Yeah,
did
she had no
something like,
strategy.
Yep.
She spent the rest of the time there, good half hour, telling everybody that she couldn't remember 8 times 8.
Hmm.
I didn't have
Are
an
the
abacus in my pocket.
Yeah, right. Are the math games designed to reinforce the concepts taught in the lesson?
Well, generally, yes. But
Okay.
there are some concepts that I couldn't come up with a game. For example, if you're working on place value or the volume of a cube, we don't exactly have a game for that. But generally, yes. And then in those days, the games are games they've previously learned and they're for practice.
And so that they're the review again.
Yes.
Is it okay to play just the card games when the lesson says to, or should we do it more often?
Depends upon the child. Sometimes you need to do it more often, or as some people say that sometimes I'll just quit the lessons and just practice the games for a while. One
And some-
summer with
Go
my
ahead.
son, he was learning fractions, and all we did the entire summer was play the games. At the end of the summer, he could do fractions in his head his teacher could barely do on paper. I wasn't his teacher, his official teacher.
So yes, play the games, as much as it will play what's in the lesson and then play beyond depending upon the child, the day, the topic, the whole thing. And if
Well-
you have a day that you're not feeling well, or, you know, you have a headache, or, you know, you have to clean the house because your mother-in-law is coming, play the games. 10 to
Think of
15 minutes of a game is the same thing as a worksheet. So if the kids play for half an hour, you can say 2 worksheets, done.
Well, think of the card games like you would reading a book. If you can't teach one day, it's perfectly fine for your child to read a book. Well, it's the same thing with the card games. Card games are more than just to learn something. They're also just simply to enjoy math. I think that's especially true with the corners games.
Okay. Next question. Do you have a recommendation for enrichment or practice activities that we should do if we want to continue into the summer?
I think we
Same
just
answer.
answered that. Yep,
Yep,
same
it's
answer.
games. Yep, it's going to be the games. Play the games, play the games. I like to think of the games are like hugs. You can't over hug your child. You can't overplay the games.
There's one other recommendation, and that is read math books. And if you use not the Dewey Decimal System, it's 516. So look up some books there.
Books in that area. Okay, good. Is there a video library of the games for visual learners? Yes, there is. If you go to our website and look under the games tab, we have a video library. Now, it is a subscription-based service. It's $4.99 a month, which is half the price of Netflix. If you're looking into, you know, so you're streaming movies or something, it's half that price. And the games, they're intended, you can have the children watch it also, but they're going to be instructions that are probably 2 to 5 minutes, depending upon the game. We'll show you how to play the game. And it's wonderful. So keep that in mind. You can turn them on and off as you need to throughout the school year. We've got them grouped by levels. We've got them grouped by topics. If you have more than one child, we have a group that has all of them in there. I believe that's $8.99 a month. So we do have this available for you. What do you suggest for practice when the child doesn't want to play a card game?
Do you think they're going to want to practice anything else?
Very good question. Vary the location, vary the time of day, play with the pet. You know, have the child play a game against the dog. Oh, the dog can't do anything. Well, then you have to answer it for the dog. So vary it. Put an element of fun in there. Rachel or Debbie, either one of you have anything to expand on this?
Yes. Add physical elements to it. I used to change those games to make them relay races. One thing I did, one of my kids' favorite games was Addition War, any of the war games really, but Addition War was played a lot. And we would start on one side of the room, and I would do this as well. So moms, dads, you can do the physical activities too. So we would start on one side of the room. We'd have our stack of cards on the other side of the room, and we'd run to the cards, turn our 2 cards over. We would then say, okay, my answer is, we'd collect the cards. Whoever had the most cards would grab them, and we'd both run back to the other side of the room, tag the wall. And so it was kind of like a way to practice. Of course, lots of giggles, lots of laughter. What we're trying to do is add elements of fun to the game. So if you have, okay, your turn to go again. All right, my turn. That's not going to be fun for your child. So it's not motivating them to play. But if you add all these other elements to it, sometimes a game can be a little complex. So what I did to kind of reduce some of that is you can modify some of the rules. You know, the goal of the game is to practice the math facts, not to follow the rules of the game, right? So if the rules are now hindering the process of the gameplay, then modify a few of them. Like Kathleen was saying, play it independently. I had my daughter play with her baby doll. Her name was Bella, and she would play with her for literally 30 minutes at a time. So finding ways to engage your child, either through activity, through modifying of the games, of the rules for the game, or another thing that I have also done is actually had my child create their own game. If they're tired of this one particular game, then say, hey, that's fine. I'll tell you what, I need for you to play a game or create a game that practices multiplication. And then you get to teach me, and then we get to play. So now we're pulling our kids back in, and we're having them play something that they are interested in.
Very good
Great.
ideas.
Yes.
Okay.
Debbie?
I'm throwing this out. Some of you can relate to this, some of you will not. I have a son who takes things very logic thinking. He was older. We would go to play a game and he would get really kind of disgruntled. And I'm like, what? He's like, these are not games. And I'm like, okay, well, what are they? He says they're exercises. And I said, okay, well, let's do an exercise. And he was fine. Then it was like, okay. And it was just weird how one word. Now, I don't think of them as exercises. I'm thinking jumping jacks, burpees, all that kind of stuff. But to him, a game was like airsoft or something. So to play these card games for math was an exercise. And so maybe sometimes it's just the terminology too with our children. So, and again, I love Rachel's ideas. And when we got active and did stuff, it changed. You're changing location of where you play or changing who's going to play with the kids. Sometimes, my husband would get home and if he wasn't too tired, he would play a game with the kids. And so you just kind of have to vary it up a little bit. But honestly, when it boils down to it, I just tell my kids, you know what? Sometimes there's things we just don't want to do, but we have to do them. And this is part of what we're doing. So it's up to you how you want to handle this.
Well, often it's just getting started. Once you get started, then you're okay.
And that kind of brings us to the next question. If games aren't used, what's an appropriate substitute? There isn't, because worksheets, they're just, it doesn't have that element of, they're just so dry. I mean, flashcards, that's just mean. Play the game.
Besides, with
Again,
worksheets,
adapt them. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Joan.
with worksheets, you have to correct them.
Yeah. Whereas a game, you don't have to. So play the games. Another question. I noticed over break that my son forgot all the math he learns. Is this something I should be concerned about? Well, I'd like to know, and I don't know the name of the person who asked this, are you playing the games? Are you keeping up with the visualization and the strategies? So I'm curious as to what they're losing, or is this over, the whole summer break? And like Debbie was saying, that was a problem. Her kids forgot all of that.
But
I had
the
an
second-
interesting experience. I
Oh.
had 4 kids in 5 years, so things were a little bit chaotic for a while. So I'm an avid reader, and I didn't read when they were babies because I was either busy, hatching a new one or nursing, or, there was another one coming up through the pike and trying to figure this out. And I quit reading for about 4 years. And it was interesting when I started to read again. I no longer was a fluid reader. I read word by word. It didn't last long, but it was a really interesting experience to actually feel myself kind of learning how to be a fluent reader again. And I don't think it lasted more than a week, but it was very interesting. But that's kind of what happens to your kids if you're not practicing things. Joan, I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
I don't remember.
Sorry. Okay.
Oh, I know.
go ahead.
The second time you go through when you learn something, it's much quicker.
Yes. Here's another one. My daughter is mostly through level C and still struggling with subtraction math facts. Would you recommend doing some fact fluency practice and games before moving on to D?
Skip the fact fluency practice and do the games.
Okay, so just basically play the games and move on. The other thing too is sometimes when you are learning something and it isn't quite sticking, staying on it isn't going to make a difference because it's still, I don't have enough to quite get it. But if I move on and then look back and go, oh, totally, I got this. So sometimes moving on actually solves the question that was hanging you up.
Yes, and there's actually research that shows this. Yes, that kids who are behind, especially kids who have learning disabilities, that if they should stay on their grade level if possible, and then have extra time to catch up where they've missed things. And that really works. Now with homeschooling, this is a little different, but I'm talking about
A more traditional setting.
a school
Yes.
district, yes.
Yep. Are there any suggestions for working with the children who are struggling through the lessons due to confidence issue? How can the lessons be paced so they're supportive for the learner, but don't take a lot of time?
I would say make the lessons shorter. And when you praise a child, don't praise it. I just said it wrong. You don't praise a child, you praise a specific thing. You don't say, oh, Sally, you did such a good job today. Instead, you say, Sally, you remembered your addition facts today. Be specific when you praise. So otherwise, internally, a person is tempted to say, no, I'm not. They won't accept, and internally, they will not accept the praise. So, but if you praise the thing they did, that is, they can accept that.
Okay, those are some very, very good suggestions. All right, let's look at if writing numbers is holding my student back, is it okay for me to write for him? Absolutely.
Absolutely. And also a little hint, use the whiteboard. It's easier to write on the whiteboard than it is a piece of paper. And I know this for a fact because I have that problem. So use the whiteboard or use a chalkboard.
It's also easier to erase, which there's actually studies about that because children can erase easier on a whiteboard, they're more willing to take the risk of making a mistake.
Oh, that's good.
That's a good point. One thing though, if you are writing for the child and you ask them 2 + 2 and they say 5, you don't look at them like this. Are you really sure you want me to write 5 down? You just put your head down and you are their scribe. So if they think that 2 + 2 is 5, you write down the 5, then correct the paper and come back to it. So you don't get to correct it as they're doing it. If you're going to be their scribe, you write what they say.
Also,
One other thing-
sometimes writing problems is because lack of coordination with those 3 fingers you need, the so-called pincher muscles. And doing pegboard activities really helps you develop those fingers, or picking up things with small knobs. Those are very helpful developing those muscles.
One other addition to that would be to let your child build the numbers using the place value cards and then
Yes.
let them copy those over. A lot of times they're having problems writing. Maybe it's not a physical thing, but they're spending so much mental energy trying to remember what order the numbers go in or what direction the numbers are to be written in. Having those place value cards down then gives them empowerment, right? So they're not waiting on mommy to write it for them, especially for the older students. They're doing it themselves, but it's still giving them the support they need so that they can. Now, if they are putting it down in place value form and writing is a physical issue for them, and you need to have something for your school to prove maybe that they're solving these worksheets, you can go ahead and scribe or take pictures of it. Take pictures of that work so that you know for sure that that's what they're getting done. You have proof of it.
And sometimes it can just be verbal responses and call it there. There's nothing wrong with that. All right, how do we effectively manage procedural memory deficits?
What is this?
I'm not exactly sure. Rachel has her master's in special education.
So this is the process. So if somebody is subtracting, the process of borrowing, carrying, that
okay.
process, the process of that, and how do they remember what the processes are. I think one thing that I love what you do, Dr. Cotter, is you have the student experience the activity. So when you're doing multi-digit addition, the student is experiencing carrying and borrowing by trading the place value card or base 10 cards by putting them on the abacus. Same thing with the subtraction, multi-digit. Similar things are for multiplication and division, especially when using the abacus. So I think part of it is we got a couple things going. One is, do they understand the process? Or are we trying to...
That's the really important one. Understand. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, but as I have 2 children who also have learning disabilities, if we've stepped away from, say, multi-digit multiplication for about 2 months and we come back to it, guess what's happened? They've forgotten because they have some memory struggles, right? So what I've done is I let my child take their own notes. Usually it's examples, right? And they have their resource that they look up. And I think it's really important that they have their resources that they can use, because I don't know about you guys, but as an adult, if I haven't done something in a while and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, how do I do that on PowerPoint? What am I doing? I'm looking it up, right? So we want to teach our kids how to use their resources. So let them create their own resources. It's going to do a couple things. One, they have it there. But two, they have it in their language. It's how they think. It's how they are visualizing it. And three, when they write something down or they make a picture of it or whatever that is, it's also going towards infusing that information from short-term to long-term memory.
Very good. Thank you,
But what-
Rachel.
Remember what Einstein said. He said, don't bother memorizing anything that you can look up.
At what point in the learning process should the child begin memorizing or knowing their multiplication facts versus relying on the abacus or the short multiplication table? And I think the quick answer to this is it's individual. You know, consider that recipe card that Debbie was referring to. Some people can make that recipe twice and like, got it. Other people still pulling it out after the 50th time. And that's okay. Again, it's another example is consider a baby learning to walk. Some of them learn at 9 months. Some of them learn at 15 months. I don't see many 16-year-olds who are still learning how to walk. I mean, obviously, unless there's other, very different issues, but, everyone's going to do things at their own pace.
And that can be a stressful thing if you force them not to be able to use what they need. I mean, how would you feel if you've got company coming and I will not let you have that recipe card, but you have to make that dish? Just
Can I
adds unnecessary stress.
Can I have one more thing to that?
Yep.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Rachel.
I feel like I'm just jumping in now. So with that process, I do have one child in my home who would totally rely on it. He could think on his own, but he chose not to. So always let them use the manipulative, always. However, if you feel that they are relying on, say, the abacus too much, what I did was I did not let him touch the abacus. I put the abacus on the other side of the room, and he could visualize or mentally move those beads in his head, but he wasn't allowed to touch it. And what that did was it started weaning him off of that manipulative. When he got to the place where he was just staring at it, then I thought, okay, let's try something, the next progression. And this is all from Dr. Cotter, by the way. Then I would actually hide it and I'd say, okay, use your mental abacus. And I want you to physically move these beads, the air beads, right, in the air. And he did that for maybe one day. And he's like, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. And the next thing I knew, he had that down and he wasn't going to rely on those supports. Just some ideas.
Yes. And you can also challenge them. Can you do it without it?
Right. And again, it depends so much on the child, the situation. I mean, there's so many things around it. Another question, my child, level D, 7-year-old, understands the concept at each lesson, but is struggling with word problems. Any tips?
Yeah, word problems. Actually, we tend to give word problems in the wrong order. We like to give the data first and then ask the question. But let's think, supposing you ask the question first, then give the data. For example, if I'm doing a simple problem, let's say, how many children are sitting at the table? There are 3 girls and 2 boys. When by giving the question first, then you know what you want to look for. But usually we'll say, there are 2 girls sitting at the table and 3 boys. How many are there altogether? Do you see how much harder that is? You have to visualize the situation and then try and figure out what do you want to know? Is each one going to eat an apple, or what are these going to have half an apple? You don't know where the problem is going, but ask the question first. That's
Another
one thing.
one is there a question, or do they have a reading problem? So unrelated to math, but do they have a reading problem? Another idea is make up their own problems.
Yes. Or also put their name in the problems when you make them up. Another one is have them make up their own problems.
I actually did that one time. Somebody needed a worksheet. I had to redo it, and I asked their child's name, and I turned the word problems. Again, it was just a repeat for somebody, just kind of a special deal. I went and turned all the word problems on that worksheet to the child's name and the family member names. So of course the kid's going to read it and go, oh, look, there's my brother. That was kind of fun. Here's a question. How do I keep my child interested in learning math? With ADD, she is difficult to corral and doesn't show up mentally and sometimes physically. Any suggestions to make math more interesting? And
Right.
Dr. Cotter, you and I were talking about this the other day, and you said something that just really struck me. You said that Right Start was developed to delight the child.
Yes, absolutely. That's why I put in some of these things. Well, even games and what are others?
But yeah, we've got
Even-
games, we've got
even playing-
activities. Yes,
Yeah.
and sometimes I
And-
think what we think is not math, it's not for you. You already got your math. If you don't have your math, that's another deal. This is for your child. This is developed for the child to help them have that interest.
And the geometry pieces too, because it's fun for most people to make those things, to make those shapes and to see what they're like. I've had 28 math courses since high school and never, all the way from kindergarten, all the way through school, did I ever have a manipulative in math class. Did I sometimes wish there was one? Absolutely.
And that is woven into the program. So again, make sure we're using the manipulatives, make sure they're playing the games. Watch your attitude. Again, see how things are going. Don't be like, oh, we got to do math again. No, it's, hey, we got to do math again. Any advice for students with dyscalculia? I don't know if I say that quite right, Dr. Cotter. Is it just say it for me? I always say the word wrong.
No, you said it right.
Oh, dyscalculia. Okay. My son is
Dyscalculia.
18 and still struggles with basic addition.
Well, my flippant answer for that was give him a calculator. And you're gonna have to carefully think think about his future. Obviously, he's not going to go into engineering. But
And so, right. And I think part of it is not only, okay, so maybe the calculator is going to give the right answer, but they also have to have a clue as to whether something's a right answer. So if they're answering, 45 or adding 45 and 53, and they say the answer is 9,486,000, okay, there's something wrong with that answer. But if they can have an idea as to what that's a logical answer, it's gonna be about 100-ish somewhere. It kind of gives them some ideas. But yeah, the calculators are a real good idea. The other thing too is we also have the Right Start tutoring program. Sometimes what happens is that the students are missing some basic pieces. Once those basic pieces are in, everything else just kind of falls right into place.
yes, there was actually a girl in 8th grade in a school that was using our program, and she was having trouble with math. And when I would go to that school, I always had to work with the kids who were having problems. Well, this girl came in and she seemed very self-assured and spoke rather advanced English. So I wonder what her problem was. It turned out she missed the day that they talked about what multiplication is. She simply didn't know what it was. And it was not a cool thing in that school to ask questions. So once I told her what it was, it took me 2 minutes. She was fine. So
What's the benefit of learning geometry so early?
well, we happen to live in a geometric world, for one thing. Learning geometry also develops your brain. Children love it.
And it comes back to it's the delight for the child. Why not?
And so often beginning geometry was simply learning terms, learning what a square was and a rectangle and a triangle. My son, Andy, thought that the only thing that could be a rectangle was an equilateral triangle. And I could not convince him otherwise. He's okay today, but.
Debbie, did you have something to add?
I have to throw in because I actually failed geometry in high school, and I realized it's because I had spatial reasoning issues and it was really hard to see. What was really fascinating though is working through Right Start with my children and starting so young and building on it. I was like, wow, I wish I would have had this when I was a kid, because even though it didn't fully take it all away, I have to work harder, but now I know how to work harder. I know how to get myself to see things and I understand the terms so much better. So the benefit of learning geometry for your children is it just unlocks so many things for them and it just builds. And so by the time you get to high school geometry, all my kids, it wasn't that big of a deal. it wasn't whatever, you know, I'm familiar with a lot of this. You know, they had to do the proofs and everything, which were fun, but it helped them to reason a lot better also.
Well, with
There's
Right
another-
Start, with
Go ahead,
Right
Joan.
Start Geometry, I built in proofs. I mean, they're not called that, but you had to explain why something worked, and that's what a proof is.
In level G, you mean, level
G&A,
G?
yes, yes.
Yes. Another aspect too is there's over 200 branches of mathematics. Arithmetic is one. So if you have a child who's not good in arithmetic, they might be phenomenal in geometry, another branch, and they can be like, oh, I do like math. This is good.
That was my
So it
mother.
gives them a different aspect.
That was my mother. She didn't get algebra. She had a poor teacher, but she really loved geometry.
Next question. Multivides are very difficult for my dyslexic daughter. What do you recommend instead?
Okay, first, I don't know if the books explain the history of multivides. That was something my mother had us kids do, where you take a number and, you know, multiply by, and then do the division. And we used to race. We used to have a lot of fun with those. I think at first she assigned them as punishment, but they were never punishment. We just loved doing them. And the purpose of them is to practice your multiplication and your division. Now, if you don't know your facts, then a multivide is torture. I agree. But you can make them simpler. You can even make it so simple, you take a number, multiply it by 2 and by 3, and then divide it by 2 and by 3. So make them simpler for your children, or use a lower number, or
So
just do half of it. But to make sure, and that's the reason we like check numbers, then you don't make a mistake, because if you make a mistake, they're not going to turn out right.
And that's the next question here. Do you have guidance on helping with the frustration of a wrong answer that throws the whole problem off? Use those check numbers. So back to this one, every child is different. You don't have to do exactly what's in the lesson. So if the lesson has a multivide that's multiplying it by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then you divide by the same, and your kid's just slid under the table in a coma, like Dr. Cotter said, have her multiply by 2 times 3, or maybe times 6, then 9, multiply, or excuse me, then divide by 6 and 9. So adapt it to fit the child. Again, and using check numbers so you don't throw the whole problem off.
That was one thing I learned as a child, that when you multiply numbers like that, you can divide, it's kind of becomes internal to that number. So you can divide out any number without any remainder. I just found that really interesting. That's actually an algebraic concept, which I learned by doing multivides. You can't,
That's very neat.
Yeah, it's something you can't really put into words. You can't explain it to a child, but that was something that I learned from doing that.
We had another question. When will long division be taught in the curriculum? That is taught in level F. The reason I wanted this included here is because Dr. Cotter has a very strong opinion on long division. Do you want to share that, Dr. Cotter?
Yeah, I'd be delighted. When should long division be taught in the curriculum? Never. In real life, have you done long division in the last
Other
year?
than teaching.
Unless you were teaching it, yes. In fact, if you were working for us, you better not spend company time doing long division, but you better know what to do with the remainder, how to use a calculator. Now, short division isn't even taught mostly today. Short division means the number that you're dividing by is 10 or less. That should be taught. And then from
And it
that,
is taught.
yes, in our program, but it is
Yes.
not taught generally. So
Yep. So we've got the short
we
division.
put
And
it
then
in there, but if your child has learning disabilities, I say, don't even bother. They'll never use it. And it's not something that makes a lot of sense. It can make sense if you approach it from short division, but if you skip the short division, then long division is simply memorizing. Sometimes they have, was it father, mother, sister, whatever it is, multiply, divide, bring down, whatever. It's just an exercise in moving numbers around. It is not helpful. It does not delight the child.
another question. Also, for extra multiplication practice, are the games best, or do you recommend additional practice sheets?
I think we
I
answered
think
that
we already
earlier.
know the answer to this. It's games.
Yes,
Play the game
or multivides.
or the multivides. What math do we recommend after levels G and H? So now you're done with your middle school, you've done your elementary and your middle school curriculum. Now you're ready for high school. And these are in no particular order, but Mr. D's math, excuse me, Mr. D math, I always want to say Mr. D's, but it's Mr. D math. We've got Jacobs, video text, Forrester, and art of problem solving. Now, there may be other ones, but these 5 we are comfortable recommending. If you are an early finisher, so let's say you've got a young child, maybe they're in 6th grade, if they were in the school system and they're done with level H, go right into this. You don't need to wait, because if they've got the groundwork laid, they can go into algebra.
In some countries, it's taught in 7th grade anyhow.
Yep. Does level H cover pre-algebra topics? Yes, it does. Now, whether you need to do, let's just say we're going into Mr. D math and he's got a pre-algebra component, you can do that. I'm not going to say this is going to drop you right into the heavy duty, but we know, and if you're familiar with Right Start, we're basically starting pre-algebra on about level A or B. You're definitely level C. You're doing some pre-algebra topics, but H has very specific things at the very end of that book. Any recommendations for helping a middle schooler switch from public school to homeschool with the Right Start program? I'm going to go ahead and answer this one also. Levels G and H they're not built on levels A through F. So you can start level G without having any other prior knowledge of Right Start. So in this particular case, if you've got a homeschooler, or excuse me, you've got a child coming out of public school and they know their addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, fractions, decimals, percents, they can go into level G. What do you feel is the biggest advantage of using Right Start over other curricula? Dr. Cotter?
Well, it depends upon what other curriculum, but number 1, the games. Number 2, systematizing, visualizing. We give them a way to learn things. And even when formulas are necessary, I give them a way to remember them.
There's also an emphasis on understanding.
Oh, yes.
And when it comes to fractions, we use a linear fraction chart rather than the more traditional circles.
And the linear fraction chart has to include the 7ths and the 9ths. So often the ones you buy skip the 7ths and the 9ths, and they make each one a different color. They must all be the same color. And as I like to say, you can't throw out numbers you don't like. Just because you don't like 7ths and 9ths, you can't throw them out. Then you lose a nice pattern.
So to kind of just summarize, it's the subitizing, the visualizing, the strategies, the linear chart, the emphasis on understanding, and using the Cotter abacus. What's
grouping
the
in
biggest?
5s and, yeah, grouping in
Go ahead.
5s and 10s. Grouping in 5s and 10s.
Yep. What's the biggest drawback to a more conventional approach to math, such as Saxon? And again, this is somebody's specific question. We normally don't like to name other programs.
Well, I'm going to give an example. I was doing
Okay.
I was at a convention. A woman came to my booth, sat down on a chair. I had an extra chair there for her. She put her face in her hands and said, I taught my son Saxon all the way from kindergarten, and now he's a freshman in college taking remedial math. He doesn't have any understanding. Saxon does not teach for understanding. Saxon himself was a military man, and he got the idea. And when you're learning to fly a fighter jet, you don't have time to think things through. You have to know exactly how to do it. Instant. So he thought that was the best way of teaching math, that you would just practice things over and over until you could do it without thinking. Well, that's not what math is about. It's not about doing the same thing over and over. But as you know, each lesson you have to practice everything that you've learned up to that point. So kids end up hating it. They don't understand it. And the manipulatives are only used if you don't get something the first time. So it's kind of like you're a dummy. That's why you have to have manipulatives. Is that enough?
That would do it. Why Right Start over other curricula, especially ones that are less parent involved?
If you want your child to learn math, you have to teach math. You can't just shove a worksheet under their nose and expect the child to somehow absorb the math. If that were the case, public schools would have been doing that all these years, and we'd have a nation of geniuses. Do we?
And so we need to teach it. I like to think of it when you bring home a newborn, let's say you got 3 other children, you bring home that new baby. You don't say, sorry, you're number 4, sleep through the night. We'll see you at 8 a.m. You get up in the middle of the night, you feed them, you change their little pants, you pat their little back, you put them down, you get back up 2 hours later, you do it again. You work with them, and then they become that confident sleeper and that beautiful child, and they continue from there. It's the same thing. We put the time in now, so then in the future, they're going to be confident math people.
Remember, math is not something that's inborn. We have to learn it. We do have a math part in our brain, which is grouped in 5s and 10s, like our hands, but we have to teach it. It took the Europeans 800 years to accept the 0. The Roman numerals didn't need a 0. So the Europeans didn't think they needed a 0. So, and we expect our 5-year-olds to understand this concept. We must teach it, and carefully.
Here's another question. What's the main difference between Right Start and Math UC? And I've got a little demonstration here I put together. So we've got colored rods here. And again, well, here I've got color rods. So here's a 3 and this one, 3 and 4. The way I have to find the answers, I have to go find this one. I'm not quite sure if to come that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you start to learn that I've got things like gray plus white equals tan. Whereas when you use the abacus, you've got 3 beads, 4 more beads. I push it together. I can see that I have 5 blue. You can tell it's 5 because 5 has a middle. I've got 5 and 2 more. Answer is 7. That's the big difference between Right Start and Math UC, or another program who uses colored rods.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
More to comment on that, or should I go ahead, Dr.
Yeah,
Cotter?
no, I had 2 comments, if I can dig them out again. Also colored rods is not subitizing. Just because you color them, it is not subitizing. So that tan one, memorizing that as 7, is not the same thing as subitizing. And secondly, the author of Math UC says it's a balanced approach. And what he means by that, it's a balance between rote memory and using manipulatives. He still emphasizes rote memory, says you have to do that.
Whereas we have the visualization and the strategies.
And the games.
How can I, as a homeschool parent, flow through the scripts of the lessons more smoothly? Well, basically, if you read ahead of time, you can do that. Or, but pretty soon what happens is you get comfortable. And then, like for me, I just tend to keep about a paragraph ahead of my children as I'm teaching them. So I don't read ahead. I just, again, as they're thinking about an answer, I might be glancing ahead and saying, okay, next paragraph. Okay, this is where I'm going.
But
again,
keep in mind that Kathleen is very good at multitasking. Not all of us can do that.
and if that's the case, then the night before, when all the children are asleep, you sit on the couch and read through it and see where you're going with it.
Can I say something there?
Yes, please.
Because I teach multiple children. And so I know I'm going to have another child coming along through this level next year or whatever. And so with the first time I took any child through any of the levels, I highlighted the actual things I needed to say. Do I follow that to the letter? No, but at least I know what the focus is and what the important things are for me to say.
Good
That's
idea.
nice. That's very smart. I like that.
Thank you.
How do we keep the motivation when the parent is struggling?
Well, enlist somebody else, a spouse, a friend, a parent.
Look at the overview videos. Email us, call us.
Yes.
We are part of your team. We just didn't go, yay, we have a sale, we're out of here. It's, yay, we have a child who's going to get a right start in their education. Now, I can't wait for Susan to call me, or I can't wait for someone to call me, and we'll walk through it with you. Debbie, you have a thought?
When I went through this period, I had to just step back and look at what I was doing all over and revamp. And, for me, like I said, Right Start, I had used multiple curriculums. So when I found Right Start and we used it and it was working for me, that was a given. So I had to make other stuff work around. And, it might be where I had to step back, or maybe we're doing too much out of the house and we weren't putting enough time to school or whatever it was, because it's really easy to lose your motivation if you have too much stuff on your plate. So I just encourage parents, step back, and really evaluate what you're doing right now and what you need to do. Take a day, go to the park, whatever, come back. But I just found that usually I'm sorry. That's usually what my struggle was, is because I was just doing too much, trying to do too much.
Yes, we
Sharon?
often have a tendency of doing that.
Yes.
Can I take just a moment to plug
Yes.
the tutors? There are a lot of tutors on that, and the Right Start website has a list of tutors. And these are people who are passionate about teaching Right Start. And if you need to just outsourcing is the new DIY. If you can't do it yourself, let somebody else does it that loves doing it.
Yes.
Wow, thank you.
What are your suggestions for those who might do school fewer days a week or have trouble getting through a book in a year? Summers.
Summers.
Use
and
your
even
summers.
Saturdays.
If you need to, use your weekends. Figure out what works for your family and make it work.
Well, I used to say I did not homeschool my kids. It didn't exist in those days, but I taught them anything I really wanted them to learn. I taught them after school, Saturdays and summers.
Mm.
Right, Kathleen?
We did. Every morning in the summertime, we'd get up, have breakfast, play math games, and then we'd go out and play with the dogs and the horse and go swimming and whatever. But, it was, you get up, you have breakfast, you play math games, and then you go do something. It was just the way it was.
Yes, my 3 kids played every single game in that card game book.
Yep. How long should we be spending in each lesson?
Rachel's got some good numbers for this.
Yeah, so that's always the big question, isn't it? Well, first off, however long your student gives you, right? So if I have a child, he literally could give me no more than 10 minutes all the way through elementary school. So for him, it was 10 minutes, right? So take a look at your child. That's probably the first thing. However, many people are type A. I'm a type A person, so I'm not calling you out. I'm including us all in the group. It's really hard because we're like, okay, they've got to master every component in every lesson and find out they're spending 60 minutes on a lesson, entirely too long. My general vicinity, and of course, this all depends on the student, right? So I'm just going to throw out numbers. And those are just starter points for you. Okay, so for level A, it was really about 10 minutes. Anything longer is too long. For level B, it was 15. Level C, 15 to 20 minutes. Level D, 20 to 25. Level E was my longest level with all of my kids. It took about anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the topic. But interestingly, level F dropped back down to 10 to 15 minutes because they're more mature, there's more independent work, and less teaching time. So start there, work with your child, and then pull off, whether put a sticky note in there or learn to streamline a little bit. They don't have to master every component in every lesson.
Yes, and because
And
they're often taught in a different way in subsequent lessons.
And I think another thing to keep in mind, the difference between concentration and paying attention. Paying attention is I have to focus and look and pay attention. And it's hard work to pay attention. Concentration is when you're done concentrating, you kind of come out of it and you feel refreshed. You're like, oh, wow, that was fun. If your child is concentrating, so let's just say we have the kindergartner, we're doing about 10 minutes, and your kid is totally into this, keep going. Now, if they're over there going, oh, okay, well, then it's time to stop. But if they're concentrating, let them go. It's kind of like learning to concentrate is something like kind of how like to learn to sleep. You don't wake your baby up when they're sleeping and go, oh, you were doing such a good job. No, you let them sleep. Same thing with a child who's concentrating. Let them concentrate. Let them learn how to have this long time. Unfortunately, a lot of things in our worlds today is decreasing the concentration time. So kind of watch that. Dr. Cotter?
What screen time is reducing our children's ability to focus because they're constantly being distracted. Also, there's a rule of thumb out there that says a child can pay attention for as many minutes as their age. In other words, a 5-year-old can pay attention for 5 minutes. That's paying attention. That's not concentrating. Kathleen's daughter, my granddaughter, we gave her, when she was 2 years old, 2.5 years old, we gave her a puzzle for Christmas. And I actually timed her. She spent 45 minutes on that puzzle, totally engrossed in it.
That's concentration, and that you do not want to interrupt. I mean, obviously, if the house is on fire, please interrupt them. But if you can, let them concentrate and learn that.
Yes, I had a neighbor who had I think she was about 3 or 4, and she told me, oh, when her little girl was being so good, really concentrating on something, I just want to go over there and give her a hug. That's breaking their concentration. In other words, don't interrupt when they're concentrating. The only way you learn to get better at concentrating is by being allowed to do it.
Another question. It takes my child in level B an average of 2 days to grasp a concept in each lesson. Is this too advanced for them? Or is this just a normal difference in learning style and speed? Rachel, do you have a thought on this one?
I do. First off, I would just ask how old the child is. If they've not had math before, level B second edition is going to be hard for them. I would say put them in level A. If they're a young child, never had math before, let's give them some basis. If they're an older child with some learning struggles, well, it might be their norm. It might be that it just takes a while for that information to absorb, and that's okay. Are you practicing the games? Are you playing those games? I will tell you this. If your child is struggling with basic math facts and you're trying to have them do multi-digit addition, well, it's going to take them longer. They're going to wear out. So what I have found is that when I take a day or two off, a week, sometimes longer, and just nail down some of those math facts that's kind of wobbly for them, when I come back to those lessons, all of a sudden they're going smoothly and quicker. So I think really, is it too advanced for them? I think you just need to evaluate where they are and finding out where the hiccups are, okay? And then go from there. Treat react to the student, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So if they are young, go back, start over at the beginning. You don't have to jump into level B because you think they're more mature than their peers. Start where they are and then move forward.
Thank you. Joan, anything else to answer?
Nope. I think
Add to
she did
this?
it.
Okay. The role of the parent is to prevent distractions. How do you teach the importance of staying focused? I think this comes back to concentration versus paying attention. And again, don't interrupt. Don't interrupt a child and don't allow interruptions.
And that's where the games come in too. They also, when you're really playing the games, they're the excellent place to practice staying focused or being concentration.
Yep, staying focused and having that concentration. This I thought was a fascinating question. What impact will AI have on artificial intelligence, have on students learning their math facts and computations?
I don't think it'll have any. We already have calculators. A calculator is quicker than trying to ask a question of AI. And incidentally, it dawned on me the other day, just yesterday, that we actually have AI built into ourselves. Have you ever wondered about something that you have that inner voice telling you to do something? That's like AI because it's based on your past history and it's used to help you for the future, and it's not totally reliable. All characteristics of AI.
Interesting. Thank you.
We had a discussion about this in one of the tutoring groups that I take part in. And, all the writing teachers are like, oh, what are we going to do about AI? And I'm just sitting over here saying, over here in the math world, we've been dealing with AI for decades. What's your problem? It's called a calculator. It's like, you'll get over it. You'll figure it out.
That's interesting. When and why were grades assigned to each level?
Well, they weren't actually assigned to each level. I mean, math is something obviously you don't teach multiplication to kindergartners. Well, most people don't. But there's a certain sequence through it. You have to first know what numbers are and so on. And actually, grade 1, level B, was written when I did my dissertation. And then the school, the results between the kids doing this program versus a traditional program was huge. So the school asked me to continue writing. So then the next year I did not write second grade because half the kids hadn't had it, because there were 2 first grades. So then I did kindergarten the second year. And the third year I did second grade. And then I did third grade and fourth grade. So I actually wrote them for students in a small school. And then we turned them into homeschooling. So that they were already in a grade, and each level is designed to be done in 1 year. And A is kindergarten, B is first grade, C is second, and so on. And D is third, and you can keep on.
And it's not right. And it was developed to take the next logical step. So it's level B is first grade with a lot of second and some third, because it was so easy to just take the next step. Because most first graders are not adding 4-digit numbers with caring. That's more of a third grade thing. But it was just the next logical step. So
I did it with some of these things I did with my kindergartners in my Montessori classroom. They were adding 4-digit numbers. And I was amazed, absolutely amazed, how fast they quickly learned that. And also showing them how to do multiplication on the abacus by take and give. They love that. In fact, they actually told me, don't give us easy ones like 2 times 4. Give us hard ones like 9 times 8. These are kindergartners. So obviously, I knew kids could do this. And you can't really understand place value if you only do 2-digit numbers. The idea that 10 ones is 110, 10 tens is 100, 10 on forever and ever and ever. Amen.
Can I add something there?
Sure.
Yes, please.
So this is a conversation I often have with parents. You know, they come to me, they feel like their child is behind. How are we going to get this all done before we get to high school? Yada, yada, yada. And I think the dirty little secret that maybe people don't talk about very much is that if you count B as first grade and G, that's only 7 levels. So you actually have an extra year if your child's going to do algebra in high school, which I know a lot of states are starting to say algebra needs to happen in 8th grade now. But if you're planning on your child doing algebra in high school, you have 8 years to get 7 levels done.
Yes.
And I've had so many parents say to me, oh, I never noticed that.
And if you also add in summers, you know, then you can shorten up even more. Next question is, when are the Spanish translation? By the way, we're almost done with the questions. So I love it that you guys have all stuck around. Hopefully this has been worth your time. When are the Spanish translations projected to be completed? We have levels A, B, C, D is coming out momentarily. Jody's just finishing that one up. So D will be out shortly. So we've got A, B, C, D done. We have the Right Start Tutoring number sense, multiplication, book 1 is done, fractions is done, card games is done. After she gets done with D, which like I said, should be the next couple weeks. So if you're looking for that, watch for an email. Then she's going to work on Right Start Tutoring, multiplication, division, book 2. And then continue on with level E and F, and we're going to go from there. So we are working on that. If my child needs a different approach to a math concept, do you have a resource you would recommend?
Yes, Right Start.
Go ahead. Go, Dr. Cotter.
Because I approach most things in several different ways. It's right there.
So it's not needed. That was easy. And that is actually the last question we have. So I'm going to turn this over. Does anybody have a question? I saw some comments going by. I'm just going to move this over here. I'm going to look and see if we have any questions that need to be answered. Somebody's, Sharon is saying, I really work hard to keep it fun. I'm just looking at the questions here.
Heather had a question I'd like to hear the answer to.
Yes, please.
Is Dr. Cotter ever planning on developing a algebra program?
Oh, very good question.
Yes, the answer is sadly to say no for several reasons. And the major reason is I've never taught it. So I mean, my algebra goes back quite a few decades, probably before your parents were born. So I would have to spend an awful lot of time getting up to speed, and I've never taught it, and I've never had a course on how to teach it. But that's not true with geometry.
We also
So-
had somebody ask the question, I don't know if you guys are familiar, we also have a chemistry card games kit. So it can help you with the math that's used in chemistry. Somebody asked us, are we considering a physics card game kit? And I laughed and I said, no. But actually I am going to ask Michelle Clark, the one who wrote the chemistry book, to see if she would be interested in working on something like that. So at this point, the answer for the physics,
She's only teaching chemistry.
so she probably wouldn't be interested
Well,
either.
the reason that chemistry book happened is she and her husband are using Right Start with their two children, and they're both professors at a huge community college, 18,000 students. We don't have anything like that around here. And because we're using, because they were familiar with the card games, so she emailed me asking me if I'd be willing to work with her. Actually over a year before we actually started, because she had to get permission to have a sabbatical. She had to go through a lot of hoops in order to do this with me. And then who's going to actually publish it? And the college likes to publish their own stuff. Well, we twisted their arm, and we're now doing it ourselves. But and I've never met her, and yet we worked together for about a year. And she really liked the corners game, and she wanted to do a corners. There is a similar corners game in chemistry, but junior high kids can do this. Actually, my son Andy played it with his daughter when she was 7 or 8, one of the simpler games. So it's another fun way of learning some of your interesting math. Yeah, I know he played the game where she was learning the periodic table. So-
Aaron asked a question. I'm halfway through A with my 8.5-year-old. Should I try to move on quicker? It depends on your child. You know, I don't know the situation. I mean, maybe you got a late start because life got in the way. Carry on, work through the summers. Maybe your child's got some challenges. Okay, they're doing the best that they can do. Carry on. If you want to, and if anybody, as we're going through this, has something very specific and you want to talk about your specific situation, call us. I'm going to put the phone number in the chat here real quick, and give us a call. You'll be talking to homeschool parents just like you. The number's 888-272-3291. And you'll be talking to homeschool parents just like you. If you want to talk to me, ask for me, or if you stump them, you'll come to me. If you stump me, we'll get you to Dr. Cotter. We will get an answer for you. Rachel answers a lot of our questions via email. So if you have something specific, call and let's talk and let's share ideas and let's see what we can work through. So we want to be part of the team to help your child be everything that they can be.
So can I make a comment on
Yep.
the person on A who's 8.5?
Yes.
Do 2 or 3 lessons a day if possible, and maybe at different times to move ahead a little faster.
Jen is saying my daughter is going to be going into 1st grade this summer. Let's see here, be ready for B, but looking at the scope and sequence of A, she has so many skills mastered. A recommendation for placement. Oh, you're saying she's not going to be ready for B. Going into 1st grade. If the daughter has done a solid kindergarten program, they're ready for level B. There's some really cool stuff in A. I mean, like really cool. I have a double master's, so I'm not stupid, but I looked at the level A stuff when we were writing it, and I was one of the proofers. I looked at it, I'm like, what? How come nobody ever told me this before? And so there's some super cool stuff in A, but that's not a reason to take a whole year to go through and find those. So if the child has done a solid kindergarten program, go to B. And you're going to miss some stuff, but again, you're always missing stuff. So just go for
It's like reading. It's like reading. I mean, you can't read every book that's out there.
And somebody asked about, can Right Start be implemented in a private school? Absolutely. Contact us at info@rightstartclassroom.com.
Yes,
And there's some conversations going on with that, but that's a detail. We got the placement link on our website. There's a placement test that you can take. Let's see here. I'm grateful for Right Start Math. Just want to say thank you so much to Dr. Cotter and everyone on the team. I'm working with level B with my oldest and just a couple months in, and we're enjoying it so much. Thank you, Deb. That's nice to hear.
Yes,
Another Debbie says, I'm so thankful that I discovered Right Start at the beginning of our homeschool journey. It has helped me solidify so much for my own understanding. Wonderful.
well, I wrote up
Okay.
the idea of helping, yes, of helping the teacher understand it too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, any final words, Dr. Cotter? And then I will let everybody get on to their day. This has been a wonderful, wonderful presentation here.
Well, thank you for attending, and if you have questions, please ask.
We want your children to be everything that they can be.
Yes.
All
We
right.
don't-
Take
we don't
care,
want them-
everybody.
We don't want them hampered in their life decisions on what career to go into because they don't know enough math. And that happens a lot to a lot of people. And we don't want this to happen to any student during Right Start.
Yeah, we don't want this to happen to your children. All right, we will let you go. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Do remember that there is the 15% coupon code that is good through the end of the month. So let us, get what you need, whether you need to get the next book bundle, or I know right now there's been a real hot run on the fraction chart, or excuse me, the fraction puzzle boards. For some reason, they're all of a sudden going out like wild hotcakes. So see what you need, see what we can do. If you want to give us a call and talk about something before you place an order, let us know. Take care. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye, everybody.